What's up, football fans? Welcome to another week of shows here at the Call Sheet Daily. I'm your host, Kevin Smith, here on the Fans First Sports Network. Thank you for listening to, I guess this is month number 6 here in June of our podcast. Things are going really well. Appreciate everybody's support and the opportunity to get to break down the great game of football with you. We are in June, not that far away, man. Training camps, believe it or not, training camps are like 7 weeks away. We're going to be talking real football very soon, but we have plenty to talk about before then. And today's an interesting topic. A week ago, it was Memorial Day, and I did a tribute to former Arizona Cardinal safety Pat Tillman. Most people recognize his story. He was unfortunately killed in Afghanistan after giving up his NFL career following the 9/11 attacks to enlist and become a soldier. Bypassed a lucrative career, would have paid him millions of dollars, and instead chose to serve his country, and then unfortunately was killed in Afghanistan. And it's an incredible story. And I did that last week on Monday, on Memorial Day. But it got me thinking about 9/11. 9/11 is a day, like I mentioned last week, that if you were alive for it, if you were old enough to recollect that day, you will never forget it. You won't forget the weather. You won't forget who you were with, where you were, etc. I was teaching school, literally in my classroom. Somebody told me to come in and turn on the radio. It was 2001. We didn't have yet computers in all of our rooms with the internet hooked up. Had to go down to the library if you wanted to get onto the computer bank. But I did have a radio, and I turned on the radio, and it was tuned to a station in our area that in the mornings at that time used to simulcast the Howard Stern show. So when I turned on my radio Tuesday morning, September 11th, 2001, approximately 9:00 in the morning, because another teacher had come into my room and said, "Hey, Kev, you got to turn on the radio." It was the Howard Stern show that was being broadcast. And if you know the Howard Stern show, this is not generally where you go for heavy hitting news. I mean, you want a great story about like a porn star and you know, the 3-foot tall dude she's dating. That's a great Howard Stern topic. That's a great Howard Stern topic. And he does, to his credit, man, he does some legit journalism. He's phenomenal at what he does. But he's not where you go when you need groundbreaking news. And Howard Stern was doing a 100% scared straight broadcast. Like, you could hear in his voice as he was reporting on the first plane having gone into one of the towers. But you could hear the gravity of the situation in his voice. I mean, this was no shtick. This was no act. He recognized right away something serious is going down. And when the second plane hit, as you can imagine, man, hell broke loose. And I remember going down into a conference room in the guidance office of our high school, where at the time, one of maybe 3 televisions in the entire building was hooked up to a cable station. And we were watching on, I think it was CNN, huddled in that small room with about half a dozen other people, just as it all unfolded. It's a terrifying day. And after going through the Pat Tillman story last week, I started to go back. It just really piqued my interest again. I started to go back and read a little. And then I saw on Netflix that Netflix is airing a documentary called American Manhunt, 3-part documentary on the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And if there was one subject I was the most curious about, the most interested in the aftermath of 9/11, it was, where is he? Where's bin Laden? And how are we going to get him? And it took a decade. But we got him. And as I was watching that documentary and reliving a lot of that stuff, you know, that's heavy stuff, man. That's stuff that makes you turn inward. And think about your life. And think about the people who lost theirs, and think about the things you love. If you're not introspective after watching something like that, you better check your pulse. And so I watched it, and in the last episodes, 3 episodes, the third one is all about the raid and where they get him, where they get bin Laden. And that in and of itself is one of the most fascinating stories. If you don't know that story, do yourself a favor. Read about it, watch that documentary, watch any of the multitude of videos that have been made about it, etc. But it is fascinating. And I got to tell you, I couldn't stop thinking about it as a football coach because when they show you how those SEAL Team 6, how those soldiers trained for this event and how it was orchestrated predominantly by General William McRaven, but also by the SEALs on the ground who were training this specific team. It is a brilliant example of practice and the value of practice and how practice prepares you for the real thing, whatever that thing might be. If you go in and watch this documentary in part 3, as they've gotten the green light, SEAL Team 6 is interesting to listen to some of those guys talk, because when they found out about the mission, they were on leave. Many of these guys were down in Florida or wherever it was, somewhere warm, one of the islands maybe. And they were on leave, and they had just come off of a couple of grueling missions and were ready to just kick back and relax. And they're a couple days into their vacation, and they get the call that they have to go back to Washington and report back to CIA headquarters or training headquarters. And they were pissed. They were pissed. And then they found out what they were headed to do. And suddenly it became the opportunity of a lifetime. But in order to prepare for it, the man who ran the operation, General William McRaven, and the operation was called Neptune Spear. And it was based on assumptions. It is fascinating also to look at Barack Obama's thought process. The guts he had. Feel however you want about Obama. I'm not trying to make any political judgments, this is not a political world here at the Call Sheet. But say what you want about Obama, but that decision that he made took courage, unbelievable courage, because he was told, when he asked about the certainty that we know that Osama bin Laden is at this target, that if we go do this, how certain are we that we're actually going to produce Osama bin Laden? And he was told that the certainty for this mission was less than the certainty that Iraq, I should say, had weapons of mass destruction when we chose back in 2004 to invade. And that obviously turned out to be not even a little bit true, and ultimately kind of ruined or began the ruination of the George Bush legacy as president. And Obama was operating on less certainty than that when he greenlighted this mission. But once he greenlighted it, General William McRaven had the task now of preparing the SEALs. And this is where football coaches and really coaches across any spectrum can learn from SEAL Team 6 and William McRaven. What McRaven then did is he built a model of the compound where this raid was going to take place in Pakistan. 3-hour helicopter ride through the darkness of night. They picked one of the 2 nights of the month where there would be no moon at all. You're flying over desert and utter darkness, 3 hours into Pakistani airspace. And then ultimately to a town, Abbottabad, which was unbelievably high stakes mission with a huge degree of difficulty. How are you going to do that? How are you going to pull that off? Well, you're going to practice it, and you're going to practice it over and over and over again, creating every possible contingency that you can and preparing for it. And what McRaven did is they built a model of the compound. And that model was literally built to scale. And they would have the SEALs in their training for this mission practice every single day on how that raid would take place. The landing of the helicopters, the teams moving out of the 2 choppers, the internal team, the team that was going to actually storm the compound, the external team, the team that would be responsible for getting them back out of that situation and handling any potential problems that occurred with locals or anything outside of the walls of that particular home. And this is fascinating, man. What McRaven did was he would have the SEALs sometimes stage the raid as many as 30 times a day. 30 times a day. But because we knew what the outside of the compound looked like from external photographs, that part was easy. What we didn't know was the inside. What did the inside of the compound look like? What did it look like inside? We had no photographs of that. So we had to imagine what the inside might look like. These guys burst through the doors, and now what? What are they looking at? What are they facing? We had no idea. So what McRaven would do is we would have the SEALs practice this over and over and over again, sometimes as many as 30 times a day. But every time they did it, all of the conditions changed. They built the compound so that the walls of the fake rooms that they set up inside were easily collapsible. So after one practice raid, people on the base would go reconfigure the inside of the compound. So every time the SEALs came bursting through the door, they were faced with a new reality inside. That is genius. That is genius preparation. Because in essence, what they're doing is they're creating a familiarity with the unfamiliar, and they're allowing the SEALs now to rid their minds of anticipation, as hard as that might be. They're not painting a picture exactly of what to expect. They're painting a picture of likely conditions and then training you over and over again to be able to operate seamlessly no matter how those conditions change. Well, what does that sound like? That's a football game. That's any sport, really. This is a football podcast, so we'll keep it to that. That's a football game. How do you as a coach prepare your players for a real game? You don't do it on a whiteboard. Everything looks great on a whiteboard. I can X and O the hell out of you on a whiteboard. But if I can't teach you to execute that stuff in real time, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I know. It matters what you can do. And that was so fascinating to me watching that documentary because McRaven totally understood that. The only thing that determines whether this thing succeeds or fails is how these guys execute once they're on the ground. Obviously, bin Laden being there, that would help too. That would help too. And that's where the courage of the president to act on the information that he was given and really to have a hunch more than anything else. Obama said he just had a hunch that this was right. But once you know that that's right, once you know that the target is there, then it's all about execution. That is practice. So I really think as we get ready now for real football, as you know, here you have all 32 NFL teams in their mini camps last week and this week. And what are they going to do, man? They're going to begin the acclimation process. You see video leaking out of a lot of these camps. That's football in shorts, right? They're doing bag work. They're throwing 7-on-7. The running backs are, doing a lot of cuts and bursting through the blaster and et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's the laying of the groundwork, man. That's almost kind of like the building of the compound. What's your first step? I got to construct the conditions first. But once we've done that, now we can start to go to work as to, what's a game going to look like? You build up to it, man. You build the conditions. You get them in shorts. You get them throwing. You put the helmets on, right? You bang a little bit with some shoulder pads. You get your first live session, whatever that might be. Everybody gets amped up. And from there, you begin. Once you familiarize or refamiliarize the guys with the contact, now you begin to script it. What's it going to look like? You start to play real football in practice scenarios, and you do it over and over and over and over again until they know exactly what to expect on Sunday afternoon. People say it all the time, man. Practice should be hard. The game should be easy. I don't agree with that totally because I don't think a football game is ever easy in any regard. But mentally, if you have done the hard stuff in practice, then mentally a football game could be easy for you because you know what to expect. We'll end with this great quote from legendary Steelers coach Chuck Noll. Coach Callahan referenced this a couple weeks ago on our show. He said, pressure is what you feel when you haven't properly prepared. And I think that's great. When you feel prepared, you are confident. And we saw that in that SEAL Team 6 documentary. And as football coaches, you try to replicate that. Not making literal comparisons between the two. I hate the idea of saying football is war. It's not. It's not. But there are similarities. And I think one of them is preparation. All right. That is our Monday show. Thank you for joining me for this. Tomorrow on Tuesday, we will pick up with our theme of preparing for the upcoming season as we start to look at a little bit at like what does mini camp look like? What's mini camp look like? And what are some of the interesting stories coming out of mini camps? Wednesday's our Whiteboard Wednesday episode with Coach Jimmy Haratopoulos. Last week we did offensive execution in the 2-minute drill. This week we're doing defensive execution in the 2-minute drill. State of the franchise on Thursday. Haven't 100% decided yet, but I think it's going to be the Baltimore Ravens. And then Friday, our hot route with Pez. We're getting into some really good stuff. We've gotten some good response for a couple of our most recent hot route episodes. So I hope you'll join us on that there on Friday as we kick off our weekend. All right. Until then, hope everybody has a great day. I will catch you tomorrow.